All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're setting the stage in 17th century India. And honestly, the geopolitical stakes couldn't be higher. The world was changing at breakneck speed, with gunpowder and navies completely flipping the global balance of power. Just look at this quote from 1715. It highlights how European powers, the so-called hat wearers, like the Portuguese, English, and Dutch, weren't just showing up to trade. They were using advanced naval warfare to aggressively expand their territory. So if you were a local power back then, you had to adapt and you had to do it fast. Today, we're unpacking the mind-blowing true story of a brilliant underdog. We're going to see exactly how they used asymmetric warfare to take on massive, deeply entrenched empires and ultimately build a pan-Indian powerhouse. This is the phenomenal rise of the Maratha Empire, a native people from the Deccan Plateau who quite literally altered the entire course of Indian history.
Here's our quick historical roadmap for today. First, the roots of the Marathas. Second, the vision of Swarajya. Third, master of asymmetric warfare. Fourth, the Great Agra escape. And finally, from kingdom to empire. Let's get into it. Part 1. Roots of the Marathas. Cultural groundwork.
Before you can build a formidable army, you've got to have a unified identity. You need to look at the cultural foundation that brought the people of present-day Maharashtra together. Figures like Sant Ramdas and Sant Tukaram were absolutely pivotal here. Between the 7th and 17th centuries, these saints took incredibly complex, ancient texts and translated them right into Marathi, the everyday language of the masses. It wasn't just poetry. It built massive political awareness and forged a deep bond across different social classes.
So what is this all about? It's the Bhakti movement. It championed genuine devotion and accessible native languages over rigid external rituals. And the big takeaway here is that this shared language and sense of spiritual equality became the ultimate cultural bedrock. It was the glue that later allowed the Marathas to organize into such a cohesive, unstoppable political force.
Moving to Part 2, the vision of Swarajya, a disruptor emerges. Okay, so the culture is united, and the people are exhausted from the endless, chaotic infighting of the Deccan sultans. They are desperate for a disruptor. Enter Chhatrapati Shivaji. Born in 1630, he didn't exactly wait around for permission to make his move. By the time he was just 16 years old, think about that, 16, he was already out there seizing neglected forts in the Pune region and building up their defenses. He was single-handedly shifting the local balance of power.
But here's the thing, he wasn't just grabbing land to be a warlord. He was driven by a really innovative concept known as Swarajya. This was a holistic, overarching vision to create a completely sovereign, self-sustaining state for his people. We're talking total political, economic, and cultural independence. He wasn't building a fiefdom, he was building a nation.
Which brings us to Part 3, Master of Asymmetric Warfare, the Underdog Strategy. To actually achieve Swarajya, Shivaji was up against massive Mughal and Bijapur armies that vastly outnumbered him, so he totally threw out the traditional military playbook. He knew he couldn't win a head-on clash on an open battlefield. Instead, he mastered asymmetric guerrilla warfare. He swapped bulk for speed. He swapped brute force for the element of surprise. And most importantly, he used his absolute mastery of the rugged local terrain to turn the environment itself into his greatest weapon. And his strategy didn't just stop at the shoreline. He realized he needed secure access to coastal resources, so he took the wildly revolutionary step of building a dedicated Maratha navy. While even the mighty Mughals were largely ignoring the sea, Shivaji was out there building massive, formidable coastal forts like Sindhudurg to lock down his sea power.
Back on land, his operations were basically 17th century surgical strikes. Listen to this. When Bijapur sent their veteran general Afzal Khan to crush him, Shivaji agreed to a one-on-one meeting in the forest. Then, he literally defeats him in close combat using a hidden wagnak, a tiger's claw. Later, he pulls off a stealthy night raid right into the heavily guarded camp of a Mughal general, Shaista Khan, who barely escapes with fewer fingers than he started with. And to really cripple the Mughal economy, he launches a lightning raid on their wealthiest port city, Surat.
The shockwaves from this were unbelievable. Snagging 1 crore rupees from Surat was an unimaginable financial windfall for the Marathas. But it was also a massive, humiliating slap in the face to the Mughal Empire's prestige. What's fascinating, though, is that even during this massive raid, Shivaji's strict governance values held up. He explicitly ordered his men to spare religious sites and the homes of known charitable citizens.
All right, part 4, the Great Agra Escape, a royal heist.
So the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb is furious about Surat and sends an overwhelming army. This leads to a temporary peace treaty and, honestly, one of the most incredible heist-like escapes in recorded history. It plays out like a Hollywood script. Shivaji gets invited to the Mughal court in Agra, is deliberately insulted and thrown under strict house arrest. But instead of giving up, he uses psychological manipulation. He starts sending out these huge, heavy baskets of sweets and fruits every single day as charitable gifts. Eventually, the guards get lazy. They stop checking the baskets. And the moment they do, Shivaji and his son climb inside, get carried right out the front door, and completely vanish. He was never captured by the Mughals again.
And finally, Part 5, From Kingdom to Empire, the Pan-Indian Power.
Safe and free, our disruptor heads back to the mountains, ready to turn his rebellion into a permanent dynasty. In 1674, high up in the incredibly defensible mountains of Raigad Fort, he is officially crowned Chhatrapati. This is a massive shift. He's no longer just a rebel leader. He's formally establishing the Maratha Empire, and he even starts his own era to mark this new age of sovereignty.
But he wasn't just a warrior, he was a brilliantly far-sighted statesman. He launched a huge southern campaign to secure strategic depth against future Mughal attacks. And get this, he showed a profound concern for human rights centuries ahead of his time. He explicitly stood up to European powers like the Dutch and banned them from trading Indian slaves. By proving the Mughals could be beaten, he sparked a wave of inspiration for other regional leaders to rise up and fight for their own independence.
Shivaji passed away in 1680 at just 50 years old, but his fiercely independent spirit completely changed the DNA of the subcontinent. Over the coming decades, the empire decentralized. Real power flowed to their prime ministers, the Peshwas. And under these Peshwas, the Marathas evolved from a regional powerhouse into a sprawling, continental empire.
Just look at the sheer resilience on this timeline. By the 18th century, they had pushed their borders all the way north to Peshawar. And yeah, they suffered a brutal, devastating defeat against the Afghans at Panipat in 1761. But their recovery was unbelievable. Within 10 years, they had marched right back and recaptured Delhi. Ultimately, they stood as the absolute final, formidable roadblock to British colonial rule, fighting 3 major wars before finally falling in 1818.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought. History books usually talk about the British replacing the Mughals, but practically speaking, the British truly conquered India by defeating the Marathas. It was internal disunity among the regional Maratha chiefs, plus some British technological advantages that finally brought them down. So how drastically would the map of the modern world change if this fiercely independent, incredibly innovative empire had simply managed to stay united? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning history, and I'll catch you next time.